Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This evening we'll be presenting Philip Pullman's Grimm Tales, adapted by Philip Wilson and presented by the BTEC first and second year students. There will be 3 performances of 4 plays. The first, The Goose Girl in Spring. The second, 3 Little Men in the Woods. The third, Thousandfur. There'll be a 15-minute break and then you can rejoin us again for Faithfull Johannes that will wrap up the evening. I'm sure welcoming everybody to our second live stream performance this evening. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the performance.
With a flock of geese.
In a lonely place among the mountains.
Where her little house lay surrounded by a deep forest.
Every morning she took her stick and hobbled off into the woods where she kept herself busy.
Gathering grass for her geese and picking any wild fruit she could reach.
She put it all on her back and carried it home.
If she met anyone else on the path, she would always greet them in a friendly way, saying,
"Good day, neighbor. Nice weather. Yes, it's grass I've got here. As much as I can carry. We poor people all have to bear our burdens."
But for some reason, people didn't like meeting her.
When they saw her coming, they'd often take a different path.
And if a father and their little girl came across her, the father would whisper.
Be aware of that old woman. She's a crafty one. It wouldn't surprise me if she was a witch.
One morning, there happened to be a good-looking young man walking through the forest.
The sun was shining, the birds were singing. A fresh breeze stirred the leaves, and he was feeling happy and cheerful.
He hadn't seen anyone else that morning.
But suddenly, he came across the old witch, kneeling on the ground cutting grass with a sickle.
There was already a big load of grass neatly cut, and beside it a basket filled with apples and pears.
Good grief, my dear old woman! You can't be intending to carry all that.
Oh, yes, I must. Rich people don't have to do this sort of thing. But we poor folk have a say. Don't look back. You'll only see how bent you are. Would you be able to help me, I wonder, sir? You've got a fine, straight back and a strong pair of legs. I'm sure you can manage it easily. It's not far to go, my little house. Just out of sight over that way.
The young man felt sorry for the old woman and said,
Well, I'm one of those rich people, I have to confess. My father's a nobleman. But I'm happy to show you that farmers aren't the only people who can carry things. Yes, I'll take the bundle to your house for you.
That's very good of you, sir. It might take an hour's walk, but I'm sure you won't mind that. You can carry the apples and pears for me too.
The young count began to have second thoughts once she mentioned an hour's walk.
But she was so quick to take up his offer that he couldn't back out of it.
She wrapped the grass up in a cloth and tied it to his back.
And put the basket into his hands.
You see, not much really.
But it's actually quite heavy. This grass isn't grass. It feels like bricks. And this fruit might as well be blocks of stone. I can hardly breathe.
You would have liked to fall down, but you don't want to face the old woman.
She was already teasing him cruelly.
Look at that fine young making such a fuss about what a poor old woman has to carry every day. You're good with your words, aren't you? Farmers aren't the only people who can carry things. When it comes down to the deed, you fall at the first hurdle. Come on! What are you standing around for? Get a move on! Nobody's going to do it for you.
While he walked on steady ground, he could just about bear the weight.
But as soon as the path began to slip upwards,
His feet rolled on the stones,
which slipped out as if they were alive,
and he could barely move.
Beads of sweat appeared on his face and trickled hot and cold down his back.
I can't go any further. I've got to stop and rest.
Oh no, you don't! You can stop and rest when we get there. But till then, you carry on walking. You never know. It might bring you luck.
Oh, this is too much. This is outrageous.
He tried to pull off the bundle, but he just couldn't slug it.
It clung to his back as if it were growing there.
He squirmed and twisted this way and that.
the old woman laughed at him and jumped up and down with her stick.
No point losing your temper, young sir. You're as red in the face as a turkey cock. Carry your burden patiently. And when we get home, I might give you a tip.
What could you?
He had to summon after the old woman, as well as he could.
The odd thing was that while his load seemed to be getting heavier and heavier,
She seemed to be getting more and more nimble.
All of a sudden, she gave a skip and landed on the cat's back.
and stayed there.
She was as thin as a stick.
But she weighed more than the stoutest peasant girl.
The young man's legs wobbled.
All his muscles trembled with effort and blazed with pain.
And whenever he tried to stop for a moment, the old woman would lash with her stilettos.
He groaned.
He sobbed.
He struggled on.
And when he was certain he was going to collapse,
They turned a corner in the path.
And there was the old woman's house.
When the geese saw her
they stretched out their necks and their wings.
and ran towards her, cackling.
After them came another old woman carrying a stick.
This one wasn't as old as the first one.
But she was big and strong, with a heavy, dull, ugly face.
Where have you been, Mother? You've been gone so long, I thought something must have happened to you.
Oh no, my pretty one. I met this kind gentleman and he offered to carry my bundle for me. And look, he even offered to take me on his back when I got tired. We had such a nice conversation, the journey passed in no time.
Finally, the old woman slid off the young count's back and took the bundle and the basket.
There we go, sir. You sit yourself down and have a breather. You've earned your little reward and you shall have it. As for you, my beautiful treasure, you better go inside. It wouldn't be proper for you to stay alone with a lusty young gentleman like this. I know what young men are like. He might fall in love with you.
The Count didn't know whether to laugh or to cry.
Even if she were 30 years younger, he thought this treasure would never prompt a flicker in his heart.
The old woman fussed over her geese as if they were children before going inside after her daughter.
The young man stretched himself out on a bench under an apple tree.
It was a beautiful morning. The sun shone warmly, the air was mild, and all around him stretched a green meadow, covered with cowslips and wild thyme and 1,000 other flowers.
A clear stream twinkled in the sunlight and ran to the middle of the meadow.
And little white geese waddled here and there, or paddled in the stream.
What a lovely place. But I'm so tired I can't keep my eyes open. I think I'll just take a nap for a few minutes. I just hope the wind doesn't blow my legs away. They're as weak as tinder.
The next thing he knew, the old woman was shaking his
you waking? You can't stay here. I admit, I gave you a hard time. But you're still alive. And here's your reward. I said I'd give you something, didn't I? You don't need money or land. So here's something else. Look after it well, and it will bring you luck.
What she gave him was a little box carved out as a single emerald.
The Count jumped up, feeling refreshed from his sleep.
And thanked her for the gift.
Then he set out on his way without once looking back at the beautiful treasure.
For a long way down the path, he could hear the happy noise of the geese.
He wandered in the forest for at least 3 days before he found his way out.
Eventually, he came to a large city.
Where the custom was that every stranger had to be brought before the king and queen.
So he was taken to the palace, where the king and queen were sitting on their thrones.
The young count knelt politely, and since he had nothing else to offer, he took the emerald box from his pocket, opened it, and set it out before the queen.
She beckoned to him to bring the box closer so she could look what was inside it.
But no sooner had she seen what it was, than she fell into a dead faint.
When the queen opened,
The bodyguards seized the young man at once and were about to take him off to prison.
when the queen opened her eyes,
Release him! Everyone must leave the throne room. I want to speak to this young man in private.
When they were alone, the queen began to cry bitterly.
What use is all the splendor of this palace? Every morning when I wake up, sorrow rushes in on me like a flood. I once had 3 daughters, and the third was so beautiful, everyone thought she was a miracle. She was as white as snow, and as pink as apple blossoms, and her hair shone like the beams of the sun. When she wept, it wasn't tears that flowed down her cheeks, but pearls and precious stones. On her 15th birthday, the king called all 3 daughters to his throne. You can't imagine how everyone blinked when the 3rd daughter came in. It's just as if the sun had come out. The king said, "My daughters, since I don't know when my last day will arrive, I'm going to decide today what each of you shall receive after my death. You all love me, but whoever loves me most shall have the largest part of the kingdom." All 3 daughters said they loved him most, but he wanted more than that. "Tell me exactly how much you love me," he said. "Then I'll know exactly what you need." The first daughter said, "I love you as much as the sweetest sugar." The second daughter said, "I love you as much as I love my prettiest dress." But the third didn't say a word. So her father said, "And you, darling, how much do you love me?" She said, "I don't know. I can't compare my love with anything." But he kept on and on, demanding an answer until she found something to compare her love to. So she said, "No matter how good the food, it won't taste of anything without salt. So So I love my father as much as I love salt. When the king heard this, he became furious and said, "If that's how you love me, then that's how your love will be rewarded." So he divided his kingdom between the two eldest daughters and ordered the youngest to have a sack of salt bound to her back and 2 servants to lead her into the depths of the forest. We all begged and pleaded for mercy, but he wouldn't change his mind. Oh, how she wept when she was forced to leave. The path she trod on was covered with pearls. Afterwards, the king regretted what he'd done and had the forest searched from end to end. But she was never found. Thinking that wild animals may have eaten her, I can hardly bear the pain. Sometimes I comfort myself by thinking that she found shelter in a cave or being looked after by kind people, but so you can imagine the shock when I opened the emerald box and saw a pearl just like the ones my daughter brought. You can imagine how my heart stirred. And now you must tell me, where did you get this? How does it come to be in your possession?
The young count told her it had been given to him by the old woman in the forest, who he believed must be a witch, because everything about her had made him feel uneasy.
However, he said this was the first he had heard about the queen's daughter.
Accordingly, the king and queen decided to set out at once to find the old woman.
In hopes that she might be able to give them some news about their child.
That evening, the old woman was sitting in her little house, spinning her spinning wheel.
Night was falling, and the only light came from a pine log burning on the hearth.
Suddenly, there were loud cries coming from outside as the geese came home from their pasture.
And a moment later, she entered the house.
The old woman merely nodded and didn't say a word.
Her daughter sat down beside her, spinning her own wheel, twisting the thread as deftly as any young girl.
The two of them sat like that for 2 hours without exchanging a word.
Finally, there came a rustling from the window.
And they looked up to see 2 fiery red eyes glaring in at them.
It was an old owl who cried out,
Beetle! Beetle!
3 times.
Beetle!
The old woman said,
Well, my little daughter, it's time for you to go outside and do your work.
The daughter stood up.
Where did she go?
out across the meadow and down towards the valley.
Until she came across 3 old oak trees next to a spring.
The moon was full and had just risen above the mountains.
It was so bright, you could have found a pin on the ground.
The daughter unfastened the skin at her neck and pulled her face right over her head before kneeling down at the spring and washing herself.
When she done that, she dipped the skin of her false face in the water, rubbed it out and made it dry, and bleached on the grass.
But what a change would come over her. You wouldn't believe it.
After the dull heavy face and wig had come off, her hair flowed down like liquid sunlight.
Her eyes sparkled like stars, and her cheeks were as pink as the freshest apple blossom.
But this girl, so beautiful, was sad.
She sat down by the spring and cried bitterly.
Tear after tear flowed down her long hair and fell into the grass.
There she sat, and she would have stayed there for a long time if she hadn't heard.
A rustling in the branches of a tree nearby.
Like a deer startled by the sound of a hunter's rifle, she jumped at once.
At the same time, a dark cloud passed over the face of the moon, and in the sudden darkness, the maiden slipped into the old skin and vanished like a feather blown out by the wind.
Shivering like an aspen leaf, she ran back to the dead house where the old woman was standing by the door.
Oh, Mother,
Hush, dear. I know.
She led the girl into the room and put another log on the fire.
She didn't go back to her spinning wheel. She took a broom and began to sweep the floor.
We must make everything neat and clean.
But, Mother, what are we doing it now for? It's late. What's happening?
Don't you know what time it is?
It's not past midnight, but it must be past 11.
And don't you remember that it was 3 years ago today that you came to me? Time's up, my dear. We can't stay together any longer.
The girl was frightened.
Oh, Mother dear, you're not really going to throw me out, are you? Where shall I go? I've got no friends, no home to go to. I've always done everything you've asked of me. You've always been satisfied with my work. Please don't send me away.
My own time here is up. But before I leave, we must make the house spick and span. So don't get in my way. And don't worry too much either. You'll find a roof to shelter you. And you'll be quite satisfied with the wages I'm going to give you.
Please tell me what's happening.
I told you once, and I'm telling you again. Don't interrupt my work. Go to your room. Take the skin off your face and put on the silk dress you were wearing when you first came here. Then wait there till I call you.
Meanwhile, the king and queen were continuing their search for the old woman who had given the emerald box to the count.
He had gone with them.
But he'd become separated from them in the thick forest, and he'd had to go on alone.
She thought she found the right path. Then, as daylight waned, he thought he'd better not go any further, in case he got really lost.
So he climbed a tree, meaning to spend the night safely among the branches.
But when the moon came out, he saw something moving down the meadow, and in its brilliant light, he realized.
It was the goose girl he'd seen before at the old woman's house.
She was coming towards the trees and he thought,
Aha! If I catch one of these witches, I'll soon have my hands on the other one.
But then she stopped at the spring.
And removed her skin.
And the young count nearly fell out of the tree in astonishment.
And when her auburn hair fell down around her shoulders, and he saw her clearly in the moonlight, he knew that she was more beautiful than anybody he had ever seen.
he hardly dared to breathe.
But he couldn't resist, leaning forward to get a little closer. But in doing so, he leaned too heavy on the right branch.
And it was a sound of cracking that startled her.
She leapt up at once and put on the other skin.
And then the cloud passed in front of the moon.
And in the sudden darkness, she slipped away.
The young cow climbed down from the tree at once and ran after her.
He hadn't gone very far up the meadow when he saw two figures making for our house.
It was the king and queen.
You could see the firelight in the window.
And when the count caught up with them and told him about the miracle he had seen at the spring,
They were sure the girl must be their daughter.
Full of joy and hope, they hurried on and soon arrived at the little house.
the geese were all asleep with their heads tucked in under their wings, and not one of them moved.
The three searchers looked in at the window.
And saw the old woman quietly nodding her head while she spun the wheel.
Everything in the room was as clean as if the little bugmen lived there, who carried notice on their feet.
But there was no sign of the princess.
For a minute or two, the king and queen just looked in.
But then they plucked up their courage and knocked at the window.
The old woman seemed to be expecting them.
She stood up and called out in a friendly voice.
Come in! I know who you are.
When they were all inside, the old woman said,
You could have spared yourself this sorrow and this journey, you know. You hadn't banished your daughter so unjustly 3 years ago. But she hasn't come to any harm. She's tended to the geese for 3 years and made a good job of it. She's allowed nothing evil, and she's kept a pure heart. But I think you've been punished enough by the unhappiness you've suffered.
Then she went to the door and said,
Come out, my little daughter.
The door opened.
and the princess came into the room, wearing her silken dress, with her auburn hair shining and bright eyes sparkling.
it was as if an angel had come down from heaven.
The young princess went straight to the mother and father and embraced them both.
And wept for joy.
They couldn't help it.
Young Count was standing nearby.
And when she caught sight of him, her cheeks became as red as a moss rose.
And she herself didn't know why.
The king said,
My dear child, I gave away my kingdom. What can I give you?
She needs nothing. I shall give her the tears she shed because of you. Each one is a pearl, more precious than finding the sea, and they're worth more than your whole kingdom. And there's a reward for looking after my geese. I shall give her my house.
As she said that, she vanished.
The horse on the house runs on himself!
And when the king and queen and the princess and the count looked around,
They realised they'd been transformed into a beautiful palace.
a table had been set with the feast fit for an emperor.
And there were servants bustling around everywhere to do their bidding.
The story doesn't end there.
The trouble is that my grandmother who told it to me is losing her memory and she's forgotten the rest. But I think that the beautiful princess marries the young count and together they lived in happiness.
As for the Snow White geese, some say they were really girls that the old woman took into her care. And it was likely they stayed there to serve the young queen.
I wouldn't be surprised.
however, the old woman can't have been a witch as people thought, but a wise woman who meant well.
Then why did she treat the young count like that when he first came across her?
Well, who knows? She might have seen into his character and started to see the two of arrogance there.
If so, she knew how to deal with it.
Finally, it's almost certain that she was present at the birth of the princess.
And gave her the gift of weeping pearls instead of tears.
That doesn't happen much anymore.
If it did, all people would soon become rich.
They wrap you up in bloody sheets and throw you down 10,000 feet. They put you in a big black box and cover you up with dirt and rocks. All goes well for about a week until your coffin begins to leak. The worms crawl in, the worms crawl out, the worms lay clean up.
Once there was a man whose wife died.
And a woman whose husband died.
And the man had a daughter.
Aww. And so did the woman.
The girls knew each other.
And one day, they went for a walk together.
You spread it all outside the bed, and that's what you need when you are dead.
And they came to the woman's house.
The woman took the man's daughter aside. And when her own daughter wasn't listening, she said,
You know, I'd like to marry your father. Tell him that. See what he says. If he says yes, I promise you'll have milk to wash your face in every day. It's very good for your complexion. And wine to drink. And my daughter will only have water. That's how much I'd like to marry him.
The girl went home and told her father what the woman had said.
The man said, marry her? Oh, good grief! What shall I do? Marriage is delightful, but it can be a torment as well, you know.
He couldn't make up his mind. Finally, he pulled off his boot and said to his daughter,
Here, take this boot. It's got a hole in the sole. Hang it up in the attic and fill it up with water. If it holds the water, I'll take a wife. But if the water runs away, then I won't.
the girl did as she was told.
The water made the leather swell and squeezed the hole shut. So that when you filled the boot, all the water stayed in it.
The girl told her father.
And he went up the attic to see.
Wow, fancy that. I shall have to marry her then.
You can't go back once you've made a vow.
Put his best suit on.
And went to woo the widow.
and presently they were married.
girls got up.
The man's daughter found there was milk to wash her face in and wipe her to drink.
The woman's daughter only had water.
On the second morning,
Both girls had water for washing.
And water to drink.
On the third morning,
The man's daughter had water.
But the woman's daughter had milk to washing and wine to drink.
And so it wasn't every morning after that.
the fact was that the woman hated her stepdaughter.
And found new ways to torment her every day.
at the root of her hatred was bitter envy.
Because her stepdaughter was beautiful and sweet-tempered.
Whereas her own daughter was ugly and selfish too.
And not even full cream milk made her complexion any nicer.
One winter's day.
When everything was frozen hard,
The woman made a dress out of paper.
She called her stepdaughter and said,
Here. Put this on. Then go into the woods and gather some strawberries. I want some, and nothing else will do.
But strawberries don't go in the winter. Everything's covered in snow, and the ground's as hard as iron. And why must I wear this dress made of paper? The wind will blow through it, the bounce will tear it to pieces.
Don't you dare argue with me! Be on your way and don't come back until you fill the basket with strawberries.
Then she gave the girl a piece of bread as hard as wood.
Here's your food. You'll have to make it last all day. We're not made of money. Secretly, she thought if the cold doesn't kill her, the hunger will, and I'll never have to see her again.
The girl did as she was told.
she put on the flimsy paper dress.
And went out with her basket.
Of course, there was snow everywhere, but not a green leaf to be seen.
Father, that's a strawberry.
She didn't know where to look.
So she went into the woods along a path that she didn't know.
And soon she came to a little house that was about as high as her head.
Sitting outside smoking her pipes with her three little men. Each of us was her knee.
As she saw as they all got up and bowed,
Good morning.
she said,
Oh, what a nice girl, one of them said.
Well-mannered, said the second.
Ask her in, said the third. It's cold.
She's wearing paper, said the first.
fashionable, I expect, said the second.
Chilly though, said the third.
Would you like to come inside, miss?
They all said together.
How kind of you. Yes, I would.
They knocked out their pipes before opening the door.
Mustn't smoke near paper, said one.
Catch fire in a moment, said the second.
Terrible danger, said the third.
They gave her a little chair to sit on.
And all three of them sat on a bed next to the fire.
She felt hungry, so she took out her piece of bread.
Do you mind if I eat my breakfast?
What is it?
Just a piece of bread.
Can we have a bit?
Of course.
She said.
And broke it into three.
It was so hard. She had to knock it on the edge of the little table.
She gave the little men the bigger bit and started gnaw on the smaller one.
What are you doing?
Out here.
In the wild woods, they said.
I'm supposed to go on strawberries. I don't know where I'm going to find any, but I'm not allowed to return home until I fill my basket.
The first little man whispered something to the second.
And the second whispered to the third.
And the third whispered to the first.
Then they all looked at her.
Will you sweep the path for us?
They said, there's a broom in the corner.
Just clear the path a bit next to the back door.
Yes, we plan to.
She said.
And she took the broom and went out.
When she'd gone, they said.
What shall we give her? Such a polite girl.
Shared her bread with us.
And it was all she had.
Gave us the biggest bit.
Kindly as well as polite.
What shall we give her?
And the first one said.
I'll make sure she grows more and more beautiful each day.
The second one said.
I'll make sure that when she speaks, a gold piece will fall from her mouth.
The third one said.
I'll make sure that the king will come along and marry her.
Meanwhile, the girl was brushing away the snow from the path.
And what did she find there but?
Strawberries! Dozens of them. And red and ripe as if it was summer.
She looked back at the house.
And the three little men were all looking from the back window.
Yes, they nodded.
Go ahead.
Pick as many as you want.
She filled her basket. And went to thank the little men.
They all lined up and bowed.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Goodbye.
She went home and gave the basket to her stepmother.
Where did you get these?
The woman
I
snapped.
found a little house.
She began.
But then a gold piece fell out of her mouth. She continued to speak.
More and more gold pieces fell to the floor.
Till we heaped around her ankles.
Look at her showing off. I could do that if I wanted. It's not that clever.
Of course, the stepsister was really wild with envy.
And once they were alone, she said to her mother.
Let me go into the woods and pick some strawberries. I want to. I really want to. No. Darling, it's too cold. You could freeze to death. Oh, go on, please. I'll give you half the gold coins that fall out of my mouth. Go on. Finally, the mother gave in.
She took her best fur coats and altered it so it fitted the girl.
And gave her chicken liver pate sandwiches.
And And a big piece of chocolate cake for the journey.
Inside.
Looking through the window.
But she didn't see them.
And she opened the door and straight in.
Move out my way. I want to sit next to the fire.
The three little men sat and watched as she took out her chicken liver pate sandwiches.
What's that? They said.
My lunch?
She said with her mouth full.
Can we have a bit?
Certainly not.
What about that cake? It's a big piece. Do you want all of it?
There's hardly enough for me. Get your own cake.
When she finished eating, they said,
You can sweep the path now.
I'm not sweeping any path. Do you think I'm your servant? What a nerve.
They just smoked their pipes and looked at her.
And since they obviously weren't going to give her anything,
she left and looked around for strawberries.
What a rude gad, said the first little man.
Selfish too, said the second.
Not as good as the last one, by a long way, said the third.
What shall we give her? I'll make sure she gets uglier every day.
I'll make sure that when she speaks, a toad will jump from her mouth.
I'll make sure she dies an uncomfortable death.
The girl couldn't find any strawberries.
So she went home to complain.
Opened her mouth. A toad jumped out.
Claws coming in the crawling, squatting, flopping things.
It was if she had a worm gnawing in her brain.
the only thing she thought about was how to make her stepdaughter's life a living misery.
And to add to her torment,
The girl is growing more and more beautiful each day.
Finally, the woman bought a skein of yarn and hung it over the girl's shoulder.
Here, take this axe and go chop a hole on the ice in the river. Rinse this yarn and don't take all day about it.
She hoped the girl would fall in and drown, of course.
Her stepdaughter did what she was told. She took the axe and the yarn to the river.
And she's just about to go onto the ice
Ah!
when a passenger carries due to a halt.
In the carriage there happened to be a king.
stop! What are you doing? That ice isn't safe.
I've got to finish this yarn.
The king saw how beautiful she was and opened the carriage door.
Would you like to come with me?
Yes, I would.
She said.
Gladly.
Because she was happy to get away from the woman and her daughter.
So she got in and the carriage drove away. Yah! 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 Yah!
Now I happen to be looking for a wife. My advisor have told me it's time I got married. You're not married, are you?
No.
She said, and nearly dropped the gold piece into her pocket.
The king was fascinated.
What a clever trick! Will you marry me?
She agreed.
And their wedding was celebrated as soon as possible.
So it all came about as the little men had promised.
A year later, the young queen gave birth.
To baby boy.
The whole country rejoiced.
It was reported in all the newspapers, and the stepmother heard about it.
And she and her daughter went to the palace.
Pretending to pay the queen a friendly visit.
The king happened to be out.
And when no one else was around,
The woman and her daughter got a hold of the queen.
and threw her out the window into the stream running below.
Where she drowned at once. Her body sank to the bottom and was hidden by all the water weeds. Now you lie down in her bed.
The woman said to her daughter.
Don't say anything. Not a word. Why not? Toad,
Said the woman.
picking up the one that had just jumped out.
And thrown out the window after the queen.
Now just lie there. Do as I say.
The woman covered her daughter's head. Because quite apart from the toad, she'd indeed gone even uglier every day.
When the king came back, the woman explained that the queen had a fever.
She mustn't talk. No conversation. Mustn't say a word. You must let her rest.
The king murmured some tender words to the daughter under the blankets and left.
Next morning, he came to see her again.
And before the woman could stop her, the daughter answered him when he spoke.
Out jumped the toads!
Good Lord, what's that?
I can't help it.
Said the daughter as another toad came out.
And another.
What's going on? Whatever's the matter?
She's got it's very infectious. But she'll soon get over it. As long as she's not disturbed.
I do hope so.
Boy was wiping the last of the pots and the pans.
When you saw the white duck swimming up the drain that led out the scullery and into the stream.
The duck said,
The king's asleep and I'm asleep.
The kitchen boy didn't know what to say.
Then the duck spoke again.
And what am I guess?
They're taking their rest.
I'm a sweet little baby.
He's sleeping too. Maybe.
And then the duck shimmered, and her form changed into that of the queen.
Went upstairs to the baby's cradle.
I took him out and nursed him.
And then she tucked him in tenderly and kissed him.
floated back to the kitchen.
Change back into the form of the white duck.
And sunk the gutter back to the stream.
The kitchen boy had followed her.
And had seen everything.
Next night, she came again.
And the same thing happened again.
On the third night, the ghost said to the boy,
Go and tell the king what you've seen. Tell him to bring his sword, pass it on my head 3 times, and cut my head off.
The kitchen boy ran to the king.
I told him everything.
The king was horrified.
he tiptoed into the queen's bedchamber.
Lifted the blankets from her head.
And gasped at the sight of the ugly daughter lying there.
Snoring.
With a toad for company.
Take me to the ghost.
He said, strapping on his sword.
When they got to the kitchen, the ghost of the young queen stood in front of them.
And the king waved his sword 3 times over her head.
At once, her form shimmered and changed into that of the white duck.
And immediately, the king swung his sword.
And cut her head off.
A moment later, the duck vanished.
And in her place stood the real queen.
Alive again.
They greeted each other joyfully.
The king had a plan.
And the queen agreed to hide a different bedchamber until the following Sunday when the baby was going to be baptized.
At the baptism, the false queen stood there heavily veiled.
With her mother close by, both pretending she was still too ill to speak.
The king said,
What punishment should someone receive who drags an innocent victim out of bed and throws her into the river to drown?
The stepmother said at once,
What a dreadful crime! The murderer should be put in a barrel studded with nails and rolled downhill into water.
Then that is what we shall do.
he ordered such a barrel made.
and as soon as it was ready,
The woman and her daughter were put inside.
And the top was nailed down. The barrel was rolled downhill, taken back into the river.
You spread it on us like
And that was the end of them.
when you are dead.
whose golden-haired wife was so lovely.
That her eagle could be found anywhere in the world. And feeling like she was about to die, she said to the king,
If you marry when I'm dead, you mustn't marry anyone less beautiful than me, or with hair less golden than mine. You must promise me.
The king gave his promise.
And soon afterwards she closed her eyes and died.
for a long time the king was inconsolable.
And couldn't even think about taking a second wife.
But eventually, his counselors said,
Your Majesty, you have to get married again.
the country needs a queen. You must marry again.
So, messengers were sent out far and wide to search for a bride as beautiful as the queen had been.
However, they had no success, no matter how far they looked.
Besides, even if they had found someone else beautiful, she might not have had golden hair.
The messengers came home, empty-handed.
Now,
The king had a daughter.
his hair was as gold as her mother's had been. During her childhood, the king hadn't noticed it.
But one day, after she had came of age, he happened to see her as the sun shone through the window on her golden hair.
Suddenly, he saw that she was as beautiful as her mother had been.
And he fell passionately in love with her on the spot.
He summoned the Privy Council and announced,
I have found a bride at last. There is no one in the nation as beautiful as my daughter. So, I have determined to marry her.
The counselors were appalled.
Your Majesty, this is impossible.
The Lord God has forbidden any such a thing. It is one of the very worst sins.
No good could ever come of it.
And the nation will fall into a ruin.
As for the girl, she was horrified.
hoping to gain a little time, she said,
Dear father, before I marry you, I'll need 3 dresses. One is gold as the sun. One is silver as the moon. And one that glitters like the stars. And what's more, I must have a cloak made of 1,000 kinds of fur. One from every kind of animal in the kingdom.
She thought that would be impossible to keep him out from his wicked plan.
But the king was so mad with love that nothing would stop him.
He engaged in the most skillful weavers in the land to weave 3 kinds of cloth.
And the finest designs, cut and sew it into 3 magnificent strips.
Meanwhile, he set his huntsmen off to work in the forest.
Day after day they came home with their trophies of fur and skin.
The best workers in the leather and fur cut 1,000 different pieces and sewed them together.
Before long, it became clear to the girl that her father would supply her with everything she had asked for.
Then came a day when he said,
My darling, everything is nearly ready. Tomorrow we shall be married.
She saw there was no hope, and that the only way out was to run away. One day, when everyone in the palace was asleep, she gathered together 3 little things from her treasures. A gold ring,
a tiny golden spinning wheel,
and a little golden bobbin.
She folded the 3 dresses so small that they fitted into a nutshell.
Put on a Thousandfur cloak and blackened her face and hands with soot. Then, commending herself to God, she left the palace and set out on the high road.
She walked and walked till she came to a mighty forest.
By that time, the night was coming to an end, and the first birds were beginning to sing. Tweet, 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 tweet.
The princess was so tired that she found a hollow tree, curled up inside it.
And was asleep in a moment.
The sun rose, and she was still asleep.
Before daylight came, she still slept on.
Now it happened that the king who owned the forest was out hunting that very morning.
His hounds caught the scent of something strange.
And they ran up to the tree and circled it.
Barking and barking.
There's an animal hiding there.
The king said to his huntsman,
Go and see what it is.
They did as he said, and came back to say,
It's a strange beast, your majesty.
like nothing we'd ever seen in these woods.
Its skin seems to be made of 1,000 kinds of fur.
And it's just lying there asleep.
See if you can catch it alive. We'll tie it to the cart and take it back to the castle.
Taking care in case she was dangerous.
the huntsman reached into the hollow tree and seized the princess.
She woke up to find herself being dragged out of a hiding space.
And full of fear, she cried out.
Don't hurt me! I'm a poor girl, that's all. My mother and father abandoned me, and I was lost.
Well, Thousandfurs, you're not lost now.
You're a trophy, you are.
You belong to us. We'll take you to the kitchen.
And you can wash the dishes.
Seeing that she wasn't a rare beast, the king himself lost interest.
The huntsman set her upon the cart,
And off they went.
all the way to the castle.
the domestic servant took it in
And showed her a little cubbyhole under the stairs. Dark and dusty.
You can live in there, you fairy creature. They told her.
They made her work in the kitchens. She carried wood and kept the fire going. She drew water from the well. She washed and peeled vegetables.
She washed the greasy dishes.
All the dirty work was given to Thousandfur. There she lived as a skivvy for a long time.
Ah, my lovely princess. What's to become of you?
When one day it was announced the king was to have a grand ball in the castle,
Thousandfurs was curious to see, and she said to the cook,
can I go upstairs and have a look? I'll stay outside the door.
"Go on then, but make sure you're back in half an hour. Those lessons won't clear themselves." Thousandfurs took a lamp and a bowl of water and went to work on the owl.
Then she took off her fur cloak
And washed her hands and face.
so that her beauty was clear to see.
Then opened the nutshell.
Took off the dress, which was as gold as the sun, and put there on.
And went upstairs to the ballroom.
All the servants bowed to her, and the girl smiled politely. Because everyone thought she must be a princess.
When the king saw her, he felt as the thunderbolt struck his heart. He'd never seen such a beauty in all his life.
He danced with her half days. And when the dance was over, she curtsied.
And vanished so quickly that he didn't see where she went.
He made inquiries to every garden, every century.
Had she left the castle? Had anyone seen where she'd gone?
But no one had, because she had slipped away too quickly and gone back to her cubbyhole.
Folded her dress away.
Put on her fur cloak.
Dyed her face and hands.
Became Thousandfurs, the kitchen maid.
She began to clear away the ashes, but the cook said, "Leave that till tomorrow. I've got another job for you. Make some soup for the king while I go and have a look upstairs. But mind you don't let her hair fall into it, or there'll be no food for you from now on."
The cook went upstairs, and Thousandfurs set about making some bread soup, as well as she knew how. When it was ready, she got her gold ring and placed it into the king's bowl. And after the ball was over, the king called for his soup.
And it tasted so good, he thought it never tasted better.
And when you reached the bottom of the bowl,
What's this? A gold ring. How in the world did that get in there? Send for the cook.
The cook was terrified. As she hurried out of the kitchen, she said to Thousandfurs,
you must have let her hair fall into it. Didn't I warn you about that? Just you wait
wait till I get back. You'll be black and blue, my girl.
The cock came before the king, trembling and twisting her apron in her head.
Did you make this soup? Stop fiddling, stand up straight.
Yes, Your Majesty, said the cook faithfully.
You're not telling the truth. This is different from what you normally send up. It's much better. Who made it? Huh?
I'm sorry, Your Majesty. Yes, you're right, sire. It wasn't me. It was that little Barry Skinny.
Send her up here. Who are you?
Poor girl. No mother or father.
And how did you come to work in my castle?
I was found in a tree.
And where did you get this ring?
I don't know anything about a ring, Your Majesty.
The king thought she must be simple and dismissed her.
Sometime later, there was another ball. Thousandfurs asked the cook for permission to go upstairs and have a look.
We're all right. Half an hour, that's all. And make sure you're back here in time to make that red soup that the king likes so much.
Thousandfurs ran to our cubby.
Washed herself quickly.
Put on the dress, which was as silver as the moon. She went up into the ballroom.
Then you saw her at once, through all the crowd of dancers. But she was even more beautiful than before.
They danced together. When the dance was over, half hands up.
And it only seemed like a moment to him. She disappeared at once.
She went down to her cubbyhole and folded the dress away.
Put on her fur cloak. Became Thousandfurs again. Before hurrying to the kitchen to make some bread soup.
While the cook was upstairs watching the dancing, she put a little golden spoonful into the bowl and poured the soup over it.
And as before, the king found it and sent for the cook.
And the cook admitted once again that it was Thousandfurs who had made it.
So he sent for her.
I have to say, I'm puzzled by you. Tell me again where you came from.
From a hollow tree, sire.
No.
He thought.
The poor girl must have lost her wits. Such a shame. She might be pretty under all that dirt, but she plainly knew nothing about the little golden spinning wheel.
So he sent her away.
When the king made the third ball, everything happened just as before.
It's getting suspicious though, she said.
I think you must be a witch, you fairy creature. You always put something in the soup that makes the king like it more.
But she was good-natured enough, and she let her go up and look at the lords and ladies that she'd done before.
She got on the dress that glittered like the stars and hurried to the ballroom.
The king had never seen anyone so lovely.
He ordered the orchestra to play a very long dance.
So that he might have the chance to talk to her.
She was as light in his arms as the starlight itself, but she said very little.
However, he did manage to slip a ring on her finger without her noticing it.
When the dance was over, her half hour was up. She tried to slip away.
They had a little struggle because he wanted to hold on to her.
But she was too quick for him and ran out before he could stop her.
She got back to her pavilion. She didn't have time to take the dress off, so she put the fur cloak on over it, then dirtied herself.
But in her haste, she missed one finger, which remained clean.
Whilst the cook was upstairs, she placed her golden bobbin into the bowl as she'd done before.
When the king found the bobbin, he didn't waste time in calling for Thousandfurs. He sent for the cook directly.
He saw her one white finger and the ring he put on while they were dancing.
He seized her hand and held it fast. And she struggled.
The fur cloak slipped open a little.
And revealed the glitter of the starry dress.
The king pushed back the hood of her cloak.
Her gold hair fell down.
He took the cloak off altogether.
And revealed the lovely princess he'd been dancing with not half an hour before.
When her hands and face were washed, no one could deny that she was more beautiful than anyone who had ever lived.
You shall be my dearest bride, and we shall never part.
The wedding was celebrated soon afterwards.
And they lived happily.
For the rest of their lives.
king who fell ill.
And as he lay there in pain, he thought,
This bed I am lying on will be my deathbed.
he said,
Send for Faithfull Johannes. I want to speak to him.
Faithfull Johannes was the king's favourite servant.
He had that name because he'd been true and loyal to the king his whole life long.
When he came into the king's bedroom, the king beckoned him close to the bed and said,
My good and faithful Johannes, I'm not long for this world. The only thing that troubles me is my son. He's a good lad, but he's young and he doesn't always know what's best for him. I won't be able to close my eyes in peace unless you promise me that you'd be like a foster father to him and teach him all he ought to know.
Faithfull Johannes said,
I'll do that gladly. I won't forsake him. I'll serve him faithfully, even if it costs me my life.
That's a comfort for me. I can die peacefully now. When I've gone, this is what you must do. Show him all over the castle, all the vaults, the chambers, the halls, and the treasure they contain. But keep him away from the last room of the long gallery. There's a portrait of the princess, the golden roof in there. And if he sees that, he'd fall in love with her. You know if it's happened, because he'll fall down unconscious and they put themselves through all sorts of danger for her sake. Keep him away from all the Johannes. That's the last thing I ask you.
Faithful Johannes gave his promise.
and the king lay back on his pillow. And
It's time you saw all your possessions, Your Majesty. Your father asked me to show you over the castle. It belongs to you now, and you need to know about all the treasures it holds.
Johannes took him everywhere. Upstairs and downstairs.
Up in the attic.
And way below ground in the cellars.
All the magnificent rooms were open to him.
All but one, that is.
Because Faithfull Johannes kept the young king away from the last room in the long gallery.
Where the portrait of the princess of the golden roof was hung. The picture was displayed in such a way that anyone entering the room would see it at once. It was painted so well and so vividly. The princess seemed to live and breathe.
No one could imagine anything in the world more beautiful.
The king noticed that Faithfull Johannes always ushered him past that door, or tried to distract him when they were near it, and said,
Come on, Johannes. I can see you trying to stop me from going in there. Why do you never open this door?
There's something horrifying in there, Your Majesty. You don't want to see it.
I certainly do. I've seen the whole castle now, and this is the last room. I want to know what's in it.
Try to open the door with force. The Faithfull Johannes held him back.
Now, I promised the king, your father, that I wouldn't let you see inside this room. It'll bring nothing but bad luck to both of us.
Are you wrong about that? I'm so curious to know what's inside. That'd be bad luck if I can't. I shall have no peace, day or night, till I know what's in there. Johannes, open that door!
Faithfull Johannes saw that he had no choice.
With an heavy heart, sighing deeply, took the key from the ring
and opened the door.
He went in first.
Thinking that he might block the portrait from the young king's eyes.
But that didn't work. The king stood on his tiptoes and looked over his shoulder.
And then it happened, just as the old king said it would.
The young man saw the portrait.
And then once he fell unconscious to the floor.
Faithfull Johannes picked him up and carried him to his room.
Oh Lord, this is a bad start to his reign. What bad luck will come to us now?
The young king soon came to his senses, however, and he said,
What a beautiful picture. What a beautiful girl. Who is she?
She's the princess of the golden roof.
Oh, I love Johannes. I love her so much that all the leaves on all the trees were tongues. They couldn't express it. I'd risk my life to win her love. Johannes, my faithful servant, you must help me. How can we reach her?
Johannes thought hard about this.
It was well known that the princess was a reclusive character.
However, he soon thought of a plan and went to tell the king.
Everything she has around her is gold. Tables, chairs, dishes, sofas, knives and forks. All solid gold. Now, among your treasures, Your Majesty, as you'll no doubt remember, are 5 tons of gold. What I suggest is to get the royal goldsmiths to take, say, a ton of it, and make all manner of pretty things, birds and beasts and wild animals and the like. They may take a fancy and we could try our luck.
The young king summoned all the goldsmiths.
And told them what he wanted.
They worked day and night.
And produced a large number of pieces so beautiful
That the young king was sure the princess had seen the lights.
Johannes and the king disguised themselves as merchants.
So they were quite unrecognizable.
Then they weighed anchor and then sailed across the sea.
Until they came to the city of the princes of the golden roof.
Faithfull Johannes said to the king,
I think you should wait on the ship, Your Majesty. I'll go ashore and see if I can interest the princess in our gold. What you'd best do is to set some things out for her to look at. Decorate the ship a bit.
The king said to it eagerly.
And Faithfull Johannes went ashore with some of the smaller gold objects in his apron.
Girl drawing water from 2 wells with 2 golden buckets.
One for plain water
and one for sparkling.
She was about to turn and go in.
But when she saw Faithfull Johannes and asked who he was.
I'm a merchant. I've come from a far land to see if anyone's interested in our gold.
He opened his apron to show her.
Oh, what lovely things.
She said.
Putting the bucket down and taking up the gold pieces one after the other.
I must tell the princess about them. She loves gold, you know. I'm sure she'll buy everything you've got.
She took Faithfull Johannes by the hand and led him upstairs.
For she was the princess's own chambermaid.
When the princess saw the golden objects, she was delighted.
I've never seen such beautifully made things. I can't resist them. Name your price, I'll buy them all.
Ah, well, you're right, Highness. I'm only the servant, really. My master is the merchant. He usually deals with that side of things. Ah, and these little samples of mine aren't to be compared with what he's got back on the ship. They're the most beautiful things ever made in gold.
Bring them all here.
Ah, well, I would like to oblige you, but there's so many of them. It would take days to bring them here. And besides, I would need so much space to set all the pieces out that I don't think your palace has got enough room. Big and splendid though it is.
He thought that would make her curious.
He was right because she said.
Then I'll come to your ship. Take me there now and I'll look at all your master's treasures.
Faithfull Johannes led her to the very place.
When the young king saw the princess on the quayside, he realized she's even more beautiful than her portrait, and his heart nearly burst.
He escorted her on board and led her below.
While Faithfull Johannes remained on deck.
Cast off and set all the sails you have. Fly like a bird in the air.
Meanwhile, below deck, the young king was showing the princess all the golden vessels and other beautiful objects.
The birds,
the animals,
the trees, and the flowers.
Both realistic and fantastical.
Hours went by.
And she didn't notice that they were sailing.
When she gave a little sigh of content.
Thank you, sir. What a beautiful collection. I've never seen anything like it. Truly exquisite. But it's time I went home.
And then, porthole.
And saw they were on the high seas.
What are you doing? Where are we? I've been betrayed. Oh, to fall into the hands of a merchant. But you can't be a merchant. You must be a pirate if you kidnapped me. Oh, I'd rather die.
The king took her hand and said,
I'm not a merchant. I'm a king, just as well born as you. If I tricked you into coming on board, it was only because I was overpowered by love. When I saw your portrait in my palace, I fell down to the ground unconscious.
Princess of the Golden Roof was reassured by his gentle manner,
and presently her heart was moved.
And she agreed to become his wife.
Now, as the ship sailed onwards, Faithfull Johannes happened to be sitting in the bows, playing the fiddle.
While he was doing that, 3 ravens flew around the ship and settled on the bowsprits.
And he stopped playing.
and listened to what they were saying, for he knew the language of the birds. The third said,
Look, it's the Princess of the Golden Roof. He's taken her home with her.
The second said,
Yeah, but he ain't got her yet.
The third said,
Yes, he has. There she is, sat next to him on the deck.
That won't do him any good. As soon as they step ashore, a chestnut horse will run out to greet them, and the prince will try and mount it. But if he does, the horse will leap into the air and carry him away, and he'll never be seen again.
Is there any way of preventing that?
Of course there is, but they don't know. If someone else jumps in the saddle, takes the pistol from the holster, and shoots the horse dead, the king will be saved. But whoever does this must never tell the king why he did it. Because if he does, he'll be turned to stone up to his knees.
I know more than that. Even if the old sea is killed, the king isn't safe. And they go into the palace. They find a beautiful wedding robe laid out for him on golden tray. It'll seem to be made of gold and silver, but it's really made of sulphur and pip. And if he puts it on, it will burn his flesh away, right down to the marrow.
Surely they won't be able to save him from that.
Oh, yeah. It's easy, but they don't know. Someone wearing gloves will have to take the rope and throw it on the fire, and then it'll burn up safely, and the king won't be harmed. But if he tells the king why he's done it, it'll turn to stone from his knees to his heart.
What a fate! And the dangers don't end there either. Even if the road does burn up, I don't think the king is destined to have his bride. After the ceremony, when the dancing begins, the young queen will turn pale and fall down as though dead.
And can she be saved?
With the greatest of ease, if anyone knew. All they have to do is lift her up, bite her right breast, draw 3 drops of blood, and spit it out. Then she'll come to life again. But if any of them tell the king why they did it, their entire body will turn to stone from the crown of their head to the soles of their feet.
and then the ravens flew away.
Faithfull Johannes had understood every word.
And from then on, he grew silent and sorrowful.
He didn't do what the ravens had said. His master would die. And yet if he explained to the king why he'd done these strange things, he turned to stone.
Finally, he said to himself,
"Man, he's my master, and I'll save his life, even if I have to give my own life in doing so."
exactly as the raven said it would.
A magnificent chestnut horse came galloping up, saddled and bridled in gold.
A good omen. You can carry me to the palace.
And as he was about to climb onto the saddle, Johannes pushed him aside, leaving him himself.
A moment later, he pulled the pistol from the saddle holster
And shot the horse dead.
The king's other servants didn't care much for Johannes. What a shame to kill such a beautiful horse and to shove the king aside like that. What's more,
just as he was going to carry him to the palace. Hold your tongues! This is Faithfull Johannes we're talking about. I'm sure he had a good reason for it.
they went inside the palace.
And there in the hall lay a beautiful robe on a golden thread.
Just as the raven had said.
Faithfull Johannes was watching closely.
And as soon as the king moved to pick it up,
Johannes pulled on his gloves.
snap away.
And threw it on the fire.
It blazed up fiercely.
And the other servants whispered together again.
See that?
See what he did?
He burned the king's wedding robe.
But the young king said,
Enough of that! I'm sure he had a good reason for it. Leave him alone.
Then the wedding took place.
After the service, dancing began.
Faithfull Johannes was still at the edge of the ballroom.
Never taking his eyes off the queen.
Suddenly, she turned pale and fell into his arms. At once, Johannes ran to her, picked her up, and carried her to the throne. He placed her down, then knelt first biting her right breast,
And then took 3 drops of blood
and spat out.
Instantly she opened her eyes and looked around.
And sat up, breathing easily.
Perfectly well again.
The king had seen everything, and not understanding why Johannes had behaved like that, became angry and ordered the guards to take him to prison. At once.
Next morning, Faithfull Johannes was condemned to death and led to the gallows.
As he stood on the scaffold with the noose around his neck, he say?
Everyone condemned to die is allowed to say one last thing. Do I also have the right?
Yes, you have that right.
I've been unjustly condemned. I've always been loyal to you, Your Majesty, just as I was to your father.
And he told all about the conversations between the ravens on the bowsprit.
And how he had to do these strange things in order to save the king and queen from death.
Hearing that, the king cried out, "Oh, my faithful Johannes! A pardon for you! Bring him down at once!"
But something strange was happening to Johannes.
As he spoke, the very last word.
His feet!
And then his legs. And then his trunk. And his arms. And finally, his head.
Changed into stone. The king and queen were grief-stricken. Oh, what a terrible reward for his loyalty to us!
He ordered the stone figure to be carried
And placed by his throne.
And every time he looked at it, a tear flowed down his cheek and he'd say,
If only I could bring you back to life, my dear, most faithful Johannes.
Time went by, and the queen had given birth.
To twin boys!
who were healthy and happy and became her greatest delight.
One day, the queen was at church, and the two children were playing in their father's farm.
And their father, the king, looked at the stone figure and said as he always did.
My dear, most faithful Johannes. If only I could bring you back to life.
And then, to his astonishment, the stone began to speak and said,
You can bring me back to life if you sacrifice what you love most.
The king said,
For you, I'll give up everything I have.
The stone went on.
If you cut off your children's heads with your own hand and sprinkle their blood on me, I shall come back to life.
The king was horrified. To kill his own two beloved children? What a terrible price to pay.
But he remembered how faithful Johannes had been ready to give up his life to those he served.
And he steeled himself.
And drew his sword.
And laughter took his head in a moment.
And when he sprinkled the stone figure with their blood,
Your Majesty, you won't go unrewarded.
And Johannes took the children's heads
And put them back home, putting their necks to their own blood.
They sat up and blinked.
He came alive once more.
and went about playing and jumping around as if nothing had happened.
The king was overjoyed.
And then he heard the king coming back from church. And he made Johannes and the children
Hide behind his phone.
When she came in, he said,
My dear, have you been praying?
Yes. But my mind was always on Faithfull Johannes and what dreadful thing happened to him because of us.
We can bring him back to life. It shall be too heavy a cost. We shall have to sacrifice our two little sons.
the queen turned pale,
And horror nearly stopped her heart.
but she said,
We owe him that much for his great loyalty.
The king rejoiced to hear her response was the same as his.
And now came Faithfull Johannes.
and the two little boys.
God be praised. Faithfull Johannes is alive and well, and our two little sons as well.
He explained to the queen how everything had come about.
and after that, they lived happily.
Till the end